Hello, everybody. My name is Raman Kumar. I'm a Principal Program Manager in the Azure Disk Storage team. And today we are going to talk about our new offering called Zone Redundant Option for Azure Disk Storage. So before we talk about ZRS option, let's talk about Azure Disk Storage. Azure Disk Storage is the storage that you attach to a IaaS virtual machine in Azure. We provide various options for various workload that you may need. And as you can see in the slide, we have currently 4 options. And as you go from left to right, the performance of these different types increase, and then the latency reduces. For example, UltraDisk provides some millisecond latency for very performance sensitive workload such as SAP HANA. And then if you look at our standard SDD offering, it is recommended for dev test workload, wherein you don't need a lot of performance. And as you go from left to right, the price also increase. Now, with that, let's talk about our new offering. And to understand the benefit of ZRS option, let's compare the ZRS option with our current offering, which is called as locally redundant storage disk or LRS disk. So when you write a data to a LRS disk, the system replicates that data 3 times in the same data center. So LRS disk protects you from node failures, it protects you from rack failures that can happen in that data center. Whereas in case of ZRS disk, when you write any data, the system replicates that data to 3 different zones so that these ZRS disks can be available even when an entire zone is down due to natural disaster or due to hardware failures. ZRS disk is available currently only for two disk types, which are standard SSD and premium SSD, and they are priced 1.5x the LRS option. And we recommend you to use it for various scenarios, such as you can use it as a shared disk for your clustered application. You can use it for legacy application that cannot replicate data itself to a different zone to get higher availability. Or you can use it in combination with your multi-zone as your Kubernetes clusters. We are going to look at each of these options. So let's start looking at first clustered application. So as you can see in this diagram, ZRS disk is used as a shared disk, which is attached to 2 different VMs in 2 different zones. And currently, VM1 is the active VM. So it means that all the traffic is coming to the VM in zone 1. Now, let's take a scenario when zone 1 goes down. And then what will happen that Windows Server will detect that now VM1 is down. And then it will automatically fail over the cluster to the VM in secondary zone. And then it is able to do it with all the data intact because the shared ZRS disk will continue to be available even when zone 1 is down. So that's the benefit of using ZRS disk. It will increase the availability of your clusters, which requires shared storage. Now, let's look at this in action. Let's first look at a shared ZRS disk that I have already created. And you can see here the disk queue for this disk is Premium SSD ZRS. And then here you can see that the maximum shares that this disk support is 3, which means that it's a shared disk. Basically, you can attach this disk to 3 VMs at the same time. And currently, this disk is not attached to any VM. So now what we are going to do is attach this disk to 2 different VMs in 2 different zones and see if it works. So I have already created 2 VMs. So let's pick one of these VMs. And then you can see here that this VM is created in zone 1. And we'll go ahead and try to attach the shared ZRS disk to this VM. So let's find that shared ZRS disk that I have already created. So this is the one. And then once you click on the save, in a few seconds, this disk will be attached to the VM in zone 1. Now, while this is being done, let's go and try to attach the disk to the second VM. Oh, it happened. So we don't have to wait for it. So it's all done. It's so quick. So now let's go and find the second VM, which is created in the second zone. So you can see here, this VM is created in zone 2. And then we'll follow the same process. We'll go to the disk plate and then click on attach existing disk button. And then we'll find our disk, the shared ZRS disk, and then attach it to the second VM. And in a few seconds, you will see that this disk is now shared with 2 different VMs in 2 different zones. And now you're ready to configure failover applications such as Windows Server failover cluster. Now let's look at other use cases of using ZRS disk. In this example, we'll look at how ZRS disk complements a multi-zone AKS cluster. In a multi-zone AKS clusters, you can spread the VMs in different zones so that your application is not impacted when VMs in one zone goes down, right? Now, let's say you want to host a stateful application on top of this multi-zone AKS cluster. Now, for that, you need to store the data on a storage that can survive even when an entire zone goes down. So let's take an example that zone 1 is down due to a natural disaster or due to hardware failures. Now, AKS will detect that, and it will move the pod that were hosted in zone 1 by moving the pod to a VM in a different zone. And then it will attach the ZRS disk to the node in the zone 2, for example. And in this case, the application won't be impacted. The application hosted on the multi-zone AKS cluster will continue to run, providing you higher availability. Now, let's look at another use case, which is typically will be useful for a legacy application. When I say legacy application, I mean that an application that is not advanced enough to replicate the data to a different zone. Many modern applications like SQL Always On or Cassandra, it can replicate data to a different zone, providing higher availability. But legacy applications are typically not designed to handle such scenario. In those cases, you can take advantage of ZRS disk. So let's take an example that you're using a single VM with all the disks using ZRS storage. Now, let's say currently the VM is hosted in zone 1, and then zone 1 goes down. Now, what you can do is that you can force delete the VM in zone 1, and then which will automatically detach the ZRS disk from the VM in zone 1. And now you can attach the ZRS disk by creating another VM in a different zone and then bringing up your application within seconds, getting higher availability for your application. So that is another very important benefit of ZRS disk, an important scenario that you'll be able to handle. Now, currently forced delete operation, it is currently in preview. Very soon we will take it to general availability, and then you'll be able to use it for this scenario. Here are the different links that you can use to learn more about ZRS disk and also share disk. And then you can also find a link to request new regions where currently ZRS disk is not available if you need it for your scenario and workload. And then you can know more about Azure Disk Storage as well. There's a link. And then finally, if you have any questions and concerns, you can always reach out to us at azuredesk@microsoft.com. Thanks a lot. I hope this session was very useful and looking forward to all the feedback.